Part 2. Chapter 1. Public Humiliation. After the dinner drama, 2 days later, Madame Chaisukja, the stain on her pride required a much more public cleansing. To prove that she was still the undisputed queen of Seoul's elite, Madame Chai hastily organized an exclusive, high society gala. The grand ballroom was transformed into a floral wonderland, overflowing with imported white peonies and cascading crystal lights. Classical music floated from a live string quartet in the corner. It was a picture of absolute, untouchable wealth. As the sun set, the heavy mahogany doors opened, and the city's most vicious, judgmental socialites began to arrive. Madame Chai stood at the entrance, draped in an atrocious amount of rubies, her surgically tightened face stretched into a practiced, welcoming smile. "Oh, Sukja, the house looks simply divine," gushed the wife of a shipping magnate, air-kissing Madame Chai's cheeks. "We were so worried after the rumors of the lunch incident." Madame Chai's eye twitched, but her smile remained frozen in place. "Rumors are just the desperate whispers of the lower classes, darling. Please, go enjoy the champagne." Across the room, Mira was playing her assigned part with terrifying perfection. Madame Chai had demanded that Mira act as a glorified hostess, serving drinks, fetching napkins, and bowing to the guests like a hired maid. Mira wore a simple, unadorned black dress, carrying a silver tray of crystal flutes with her head demurely bowed. "Can you believe her?" whispered a woman in a dreadful sequined gown, loudly enough for Mira to hear. The so-called new matriarch, reduced to a waitress. "I suppose trash always returns to the kitchen." "It's pathetic," another socialite sneered, plucking a glass from Myra's tray without even looking at her. "She has no presence. No breeding." Mira didn't say a word. Her dark, rich brown skin glowed under the chandeliers, her expression a serene, placid mask. She simply bowed her head lower, a masterclass in feigned submission. Meanwhile, Kim Hoon was having the time of her life. Completely recovered from her catastrophic bathroom emergency, Hoon paraded around the ballroom like a peacock in heat. She wore a striking, albeit slightly desperate, crimson gown, laughing loudly and clinging to the arms of the director's wives. She was soaking up the attention, presenting herself as the poised, elegant, true ideal wife of the Seo family. Every time she passed Mira, Hoon shot her a look of vindictive, absolute triumph. As the evening progressed, the string quartet faded out, and an announcer tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer beamed. "We have a special treat tonight. The lovely Miss Kim Hoon, a formerly trained and celebrated entertainer, has graciously agreed to perform a traditional fan dance for us." The crowd offered polite, expectant applause. Hoon stepped into the center of the polished marble dance floor, a pair of elaborate silk fans in her hands. She struck a dramatic, poised starting position, tossing one last, deeply arrogant smirk directly at Mira, who was standing quietly by a marble pillar. Mira simply blinked, her lips curving into a microscopic, lethal smile. She mentally counted down from 10. It had taken a highly concentrated, completely untraceable botanical nerve stimulant, slipped into Hoon's pre-performance sparkling water, to set the stage. The extract didn't cause pain. It caused a catastrophic, euphoric misfire of the nervous system. The traditional, elegant music began. Hoon opened her fans with a sharp snap, moving with practiced, fluid grace. She spun, her crimson dress flaring out beautifully. The guests murmured in approval. Then, on her third rotation, Hoon's right foot jerked out of rhythm. She stumbled, her eyes widening in brief panic, but she quickly tried to cover it up with a dramatic sweep of her fans. The guests blinked. Did they just hallucinate that? The music swelled. Hoon leaped into the air, aiming for a graceful landing. Instead, her knee buckled wildly, and she landed with a heavy, uncoordinated thud. Her shoulders twitched violently. And then it started. A tiny, breathless giggle escaped Hoon's lips. She slapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting frantically around the room. The music was solemn and dramatic, but Hoon's chest began to heave. "Hey hee hee." She dropped one of her silk fans. Her arms clamped down to her sides as she twisted her torso, her face scrunching up as if an invisible ghost was aggressively tickling her ribs. Ha 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 ha. The giggle erupted into a full-bellied, hysterical cackle. Hone threw her head back, laughing so hard that tears instantly streamed down her carefully contoured face. She spun in a frantic, disjointed circle, slapping her own thighs. Stop. Ha ha. Oh my god, it tickles. Make it stop. The ballroom fell into a horrified, dead silence. The music screeched to a halt as the cellist completely lost his place. What on earth is she doing? Whispered the shipping magnate's wife, clutching her pearls. Has she gone mad? Hee hee hee. Oh boy. Hone snorted loudly, a deeply unattractive sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. She was doubled over, gasping for air, pointing at the horrified guests as if they were the funniest things she had ever seen. Madame Che's face drained of all blood. Her social empire was crumbling before her eyes for the second time in a week. Junho, she hissed violently, scanning the room for her son. Junho, restrain your lunatic fiancé this instant. Junho, who had been hiding near the buffet table and nursing a glass of scotch, went pale. He practically scrambled across the dance floor. Hone, stop it. You're embarrassing us. He reached out to grab her arm, but Hone shrieked with manic laughter, slapping his hand away. Don't touch me. You're so dusty. Ha ha. Sublevel 4 boy. Junho recoiled as if he had been slapped. The guests gasped. Completely unhinged and riding a wave of terrifying, chemically induced euphoria, Hone's wild eyes landed on an object resting against the grand staircase. It was Chairman Seo's decorative walking cane, a heavy piece of solid mahogany topped with a brass eagle head. Still cackling like a hyena, Hone lunged for the cane. Oh look! A stick, she giggled hysterically, swinging it through the air with a loud whoosh. Hone, put that down. Madame Chai ordered, stepping forward with all the aristocratic authority she could muster. Hone looked at her future mother-in-law, her head tilting to the side. A wide, terrifying smile spread across her face. You look like a very angry prune, Mother Sukja. Let's play piñata. With a battle cry of pure, tickled madness, Hone charged into the crowd. Thwack! My Chanel bag, a socialite screamed as Hone aggressively flogged her purse with the heavy cane. Run! She's possessed, yelled a corporate director, diving behind a towering ice sculpture of a swan. Total chaos erupted. The elegant, sophisticated party instantly dissolved into a stampede of terrified billionaires. Women in high heels were slipping on the polished marble, men were throwing their suit jackets over their heads for protection. And in the center of it all was Hone, laughing so hard she was practically wheezing, swinging the cane with terrifying inaccuracy. Thwack! Smack! She whipped a tray of caviar out of a waiter's hands, sending fish eggs flying into the hair of the ladies of the board. Madame Chai watched the destruction of her life's work with absolute, catatonic horror. Security, she finally screeched. Someone stop her. Hone's head snapped toward the sound of Madame Chai's voice. The manic laughter hitched up an octave. She locked eyes with the matriarch. Tag. You're it. Hone squealed. Madame Chai's eyes bugged out of her head. Without a second thought for her dignity, her tight dress, or her heavy diamond jewelry, Madame Chai hoisted her skirt up to her knees and bolted. Get away from me, you insane wench. Madame Chai shrieked, sprinting across the ballroom with surprising agility for a woman her age. Come back, prune face. Ha ha. Hone cackled, taking off after her. It was the most humiliating, slapstick spectacle in the history of Seoul's elite. Madame Chai, screaming at the top of her lungs, dodged around the dessert tables, knocking over a towering crocumbush, with a wildly laughing Hone hot on her heels, swinging the brass-headed cane like a deranged golfer. Swish! Thud! The cane repeatedly struck the marble floor mere inches from Madame Chai's expensive shoes as they ran laps around the grand piano. Junho was hopelessly chasing them both, panting heavily, slipping on scattered caviar and crashing face-first into a floral arrangement. Standing in the shadows of a massive marble column, completely untouched by the screaming, running, and flying pastries, Mira watched the destruction with a look of absolute, icy satisfaction. Suddenly, a massive, warm presence stepped up behind her. The scent of cedarwood and bergamot wrapped around her, blocking out the chaos of the room. Minjun stood at her back, his hands slipping smoothly into his trouser pockets as he watched Han flog a potted ficus tree. Minjun leaned down, his lips brushing softly against the shell of Myra's ear. "Are you done having fun, my queen?" he whispered, his deep baritone vibrating with dark, immense amusement. Myra didn't take her eyes off the catastrophic chase happening across the room. She simply tilted her head back, resting it against his solid chest, and offered a single, elegant nod. "Then let's leave them to the zoo," Minjun murmured. He placed a protective hand on her lower back, guiding her silently out of the ballroom, completely ignored by the screaming, panicked socialites. They took the private elevator up to the West Wing, leaving the sound of Han's maniacal cackling and Madame Che's terrified shrieks far below. The heavy, soundproof doors of the master's suite hissed shut, sealing them in a world of total tranquility. Myra kicked off her modest black flats, sighing as her feet hit the plush rug. The servant facade instantly melted away. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering Seoul skyline, the reflection of the city lights dancing in her dark, calculating eyes. Minjun unbuttoned his suit jacket, tossing it onto an armchair. He walked up behind her, wrapping both arms securely around her waist, pulling her back against him. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in as if she were the only oxygen in the room. "That was a masterpiece," Minjun chuckled softly, pressing a kiss to her neck. "My stepmother will never be able to show her face at a country club again." Myra leaned back into his embrace, her hands coming up to rest over his. But her smile had faded, replaced by a chilling, resolute coldness. The parlor tricks and public humiliations were satisfying, yes. But they weren't enough. They didn't erase the memory of the scaffolding. "The humiliation is over," Myra whispered into the quiet room, her voice hardening into pure steel. "It's time for the real punishment to begin." Minjun's hands tightened around her waist. He didn't question her. He simply waited, entirely at her command. "Tell me." Myra turned in his arms, looking up into his dark, merciless eyes. "Han thinks she is untouchable because she is riding on Junho's coattails. And Junho still thinks he has a safety net in this company. I want to rip the ground out from under both of them." She reached up, her fingers tracing the lapels of his crisp shirt as she leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a lethal, conspiring whisper. "Tomorrow, I want you to initiate a massive, random, internal audit on the shell companies Junho used to embezzle my trust fund 5 years ago. Make sure the paper trail points directly and exclusively to Han's personal bank accounts." Minjun's eyes flared with a sudden, dark brilliance. His lips twitched into a devastatingly wicked smirk. "You want to frame her for his corporate treason," Minjun murmured, the brilliance of the trap dawning on him. "I don't just want to frame her," Myra corrected softly, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, vengeful fire. "I want Junho to find the evidence himself. I want him to believe that the woman he betrayed me for has been stealing from him the entire time. I want to watch them turn on each other like starving wolves." Minjun let out a low, rough exhale. He looked at the woman in his arms, so beautiful, so brilliantly ruthless, and felt an overwhelming surge of absolute worship. He cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "Consider it done," he promised, his voice a low, heavy vow. "By tomorrow night, they will be tearing each other to pieces." He leaned down and captured her lips in a deep, intoxicating kiss, pulling her tightly against his body. They stood there in the quiet luxury of their suite, wrapped securely in each other's embrace, completely oblivious and entirely indifferent to the sounds of sirens finally wailing in the distance as security arrived to subdue the madwoman with the cane. "Tag. Your IT." And Madame Chai hoisted her designer skirt and ran. Han chased the most powerful woman in Seoul around a grand piano with a brass-headed cane while calling her prune face, and Myra planned the whole thing from a quiet corner while sipping imaginary tea. But did you catch what just happened at the end of that scene? Myra just whispered a plan so cold, so calculated, so absolutely diabolical that the humiliation era is over. The destruction era has officially begun. Subscribe right now because what's coming next will make the Kane scene look like a warm-up. Drop prune face in the comments if you cannot breathe right now. Like, share, and do not click away. The wolves are about to eat each other alive. The sun rose over the CO mansion, but inside Madame Che's private East Wing sitting room, the atmosphere was as lethal and suffocating as a viper's nest. Madame Chaisukja sat rigidly on her velvet chaise lounge, a silk dressing gown wrapped tightly around her. She was holding a heavy crystal ice pack to her left ankle, the exact spot where Houn had successfully landed a brutal blow with the brass-headed cane. Her surgically tightened face was an absolute mask of murderous, aristocratic fury. Standing in the center of the plush Persian rug, looking like she had been dragged backward through a hedge, was Kim Houn. The botanical nerve stimulant had completely worn off, leaving Houn with a splitting headache, zero dignity, and fragmented, horrifying memories of cackling like a hyena while chasing the richest women in Seoul. "Explain yourself," Madame Chai whispered. The quietness of her voice was far more terrifying than a scream. Houn burst into desperate, trembling tears, falling to her knees on the rug. "Mother Sukja, I swear to you, I don't know what happened. One minute I was dancing, and the next I felt this overwhelming, hysterical tickling sensation. I couldn't stop laughing. Mira must have drugged me." "Mira?" Madame Chai scoffed, her voice cracking like a whip. "Mira was standing on the opposite side of the ballroom. She didn't have to lift a finger to destroy you, because you did it yourself. You beat the wife of the Hyundai CEO with a stick, Houn. You chased me around a grand piano while calling me prune face. I didn't mean it." Houn wailed, clutching her head. "I don't care what you meant." Madame Chai snarled, slamming her free hand down on the armrest. "You are a weak, sloppy, pathetic liability. The tabloids are already calling it the CO family psycho circus. You are no longer permitted to speak to the press. You will not leave this house without my explicit permission. Now get out of my sight before I have security throw you out the window." Houn let out a pathetic whimper, scrambling off the floor and fleeing the room. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Madame Chai alone with the one person she actually cared about. Junho stepped out from the shadows near the window, his shoulders slumped, still wearing the cheap trousers he was forced to wear to the basement. The moment Houn was gone, Madame Chai's terrifying, icy demeanor melted into fierce, overbearing maternal devotion. She tossed the ice pack aside and reached out to him. "My poor, brilliant boy," Madame Chai cooed, her eyes softening as Junho walked over and knelt beside her chaise. She stroked his perfectly styled hair, her long manicured nails lightly scratching his scalp. "Look at what that exiled bastard and his street rat wife have reduced you to. Forcing the true heir of CO Holdings into a boiler room, it is an unforgivable crime." "Mother, I can't take it anymore," Junho gritted his teeth, his voice trembling with a toxic mix of humiliation and rage. "Minjun stripped my credentials. I'm sitting in sub-level 4 counting 15-year-old catering receipts. Houn is completely unhinged. We have nothing." Madame Chai's hand suddenly stopped stroking his hair. She grabbed his chin, forcing him to look up into her eyes, which were now blazing with absolute, unadulterated villainy. "We do not have nothing, Junho," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you honestly think I spent 30 years manipulating your father, burying his mistresses, and securing this empire just to hand it over to a defective stepson and the girl you failed to kill properly?" Junho's breath hitched. "Mother, what are you saying?" "Father signed the shares over. Minjun is the chairman." For now, Madame Chai smiled, a chilling, terrifying expression. "Let them have their little honeymoon phase. Let Mira play the queen of the mansion. They think I bowed to them. They think I am defeated because of a few parlor tricks and a ruined luncheon. But I have the board of directors in my pocket. I know where the company's real leverage is buried." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am already making calls, Junho. I am gathering the necessary votes for a motion of no confidence. Minjun's sudden return is unstable. I will prove he is unfit to lead, and when I do, I will rip the company out of his hands and drop it directly into your lap." Junho's eyes widened, a spark of desperate hope finally igniting in his chest. Can you really do it? I am Chae-suk-ja, she declared with absolute, terrifying arrogance. I never lose. But I need time to set the trap. So, my golden boy, you must endure. Go to that filthy basement. Play the defeated dog. Let Min-jun think he has broken you. Because when the time comes to strike, they won't even see the blade coming. Junho stood up, his chest swelling with renewed confidence. His mother was right. He wasn't a victim. He was a predator lying in wait. I understand, mother. I'll play the part. An hour later, Junho stepped off the rattling freight elevator into the suffocating, humid air of sub-level 4. The main boiler thump hissed angrily in the background. Chapter 2: False Accusation. The tires of Junho's cab squealed against the pristine gravel of the Seo mansion driveway. He didn't wait for the driver to fully stop, throwing a crumpled bill through the partition and storming out. He was still wearing his cheap, dust-covered sub-level 4 trousers, his hair wild, his eyes completely bloodshot. Clutched in his right hand was the crushed manila folder containing his absolute ruin. He bypassed the grand foyer, ignoring the startled bows of the household staff, and marched directly toward the East Wing guest quarters. Inside her downgraded, cramped room, Kim Ha-eun was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a fresh ice pack to her throbbing temples. She was aggressively scrolling through her phone, watching in horror as the social media hashtags from her cane-wielding rampage the night before trended at #1 across South Korea. Bang! The heavy oak door flew open with such violent force it cracked against the drywall. Ha-eun shrieked, dropping her phone and the ice pack. Junho, what is wrong with you? You nearly gave me a heart attack. A heart attack? Junho's voice was a terrifying, guttural rasp. He locked the door behind him with a sharp click and began stalking toward her, his chest heaving. A heart attack would be too merciful for what you've done, you thieving, venomous parasite. Ha-eun scrambled backward on the bed, genuinely terrified by the feral, unhinged look in his eyes. He looked like a man who had completely snapped. What are you talking about? Junho, you're scaring me. Stop acting. Junho roared, the sound vibrating the window panes. He reared back and violently threw the crushed manila folder directly at her face. The heavy, forged documents exploded into the air like lethal confetti, raining down on the bed. Look at them. Junho commanded, pointing a trembling finger at the papers. Look at the Cayman Islands accounts. Look at the Paris real estate deeds. You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought you could bleed me dry and leave me to take the fall for Adriana? Ha-eun blinked in utter confusion. With shaking hands, she picked up the top document. It was the flawlessly forged bank statement showing a $3 million transfer into an account bearing her exact name and signature. I don't. Ha-eun stammered, her face turning chalk-white as she read the numbers. Junho, I don't know what this is. I don't have an account in the Cayman Islands. I've never bought property in Paris. Liar. Junho lunged forward, grabbing her by the shoulders of her silk blouse and pulling her up to his eye level. It has your signature. It has your personal routing numbers. October 14th, Ha-eun. The day we threw her down the river. While I was protecting us, you were transferring the blood money into your own pockets. No, Junho, please, you have to believe me. Ha-eun sobbed frantically, completely overwhelmed by the fabricated evidence. Someone planted this. It's a setup. It's Mira. She did this to tear us apart. Junho let out a harsh, barking laugh, dropping her back onto the mattress as if touching her disgusted him. Mira? The woman who grew up in Paris? The woman who doesn't even know who Adriana is? You expect me to believe my new sister-in-law magically forged 15 years of offshore banking documents and slipped them into a sealed archive box? The pieces were aligning perfectly in his paranoid mind, exactly as Mira had designed. It all makes sense now, Junho sneered, pacing the floor like a caged predator. The horse laxatives. You didn't poison the food to hit Mira. You poisoned it to take me out. You wanted me hospitalized or dead so you could take the money and run. That's insane. I was trying to poison her. Ha-eun shrieked, hysterical tears streaming down her face. And the party. Junho continued, completely ignoring her, caught in the web of his own deductions. The laughing, the cane, chasing my mother. It wasn't an accident. You wanted the courts to think you were out of your mind so you wouldn't go to prison for embezzlement. Junho, listen to yourself. You sound crazy. Hoon begged, sliding off the bed and trying to grab his hands. We are a team. We did this together. I love you. Don't touch me, he yelled, slapping her hands away. What in God's name is going on here? The connecting door to the sitting room swung open. Madam Chai stood on the threshold, her eyes blazing with fury. She had heard the screaming from down the hall and marched over to put an end to it. I told you both to keep quiet. Are you trying to bring more disgrace to this house? Junho spun around to face his mother. He snatched the forged bank statement off the bed and shoved it into Madam Chai's hands. Read it, mother, Junho spat, pointing an accusing finger at a sobbing Hoon. Read what your ideal future daughter-in-law has been doing while we were busy protecting the family. Madam Chai pulled her gold-rimmed lorgnette from her pocket. She scanned the document. Her eyes widened. Then, she read the property deed. The wire transfer logs. The massive, multi-million-dollar sums. When Madam Chai finally lowered the papers, the temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. She looked at Hoon not with anger, but with the cold, detached disgust one might reserve for a cockroach. To Madam Chai, embezzlement from the Seo family wasn't just a crime, it was high treason. You, Madam Chai whispered, stepping slowly toward the terrified girl. You filthy, treacherous little rat. We lifted you from the gutter. We gave you Chanel. We gave you a title. And you stole from my son. Mother Sukja, I swear I didn't. Hoon cried, backing into the wall, her hands raised in defense. It's fake. It's a frame-up. Smack. Madam Chai's hand cracked across Hoon's face with the force of a thunderclap. The heavy diamond rings on her fingers cut into Hoon's cheek, sending her crashing to the floor. Do not call me mother, Madam Chai hissed, standing over her like a vengeful executioner. The engagement is over. You are dead to this family. Madam Chai turned on her heel and snapped her fingers. Two of the mansion's massive security guards, who had been lingering in the hall, immediately stepped into the room. Strip her, Madam Chai commanded coldly. Hoon gasped, clutching her silk blouse. What? Every piece of jewelry, every designer bag, every tailored dress you own was bought with Seo money, Madam Chai declared. And since you have apparently siphoned $3 million of it into a private account, you can buy your own clothes. Confiscate everything in this room. Throw her out on the street in what she wore to this house 3 years ago. No. Junho, please. Hoon screamed, reaching desperately for him as the security guards hauled her to her feet. You can't do this. We belong together. I know your secrets. Junho simply turned his back on her, his posture rigid. Throw her out, mother. I never want to see her face again. High above the grand foyer, standing in the shadows of the second-floor mezzanine, Mira and Minjun watched the entire spectacle unfold. Below them, the heavy front doors were wrenched open. Hoon, stripped of her designer gown and forced into a cheap, faded tracksuit she hadn't worn since her days as a nobody, was physically tossed out onto the gravel driveway by the guards. She landed hard on her hands and knees, weeping uncontrollably as her few meager, non-designer possessions were thrown in a cardboard box beside her. The heavy iron gates buzzed open. She was escorted off the property, completely broken, disgraced, and utterly alone. Chapter 3. Broken Alliance. The atmosphere inside the penthouse boardroom of Seo Holdings was thick with a familiar, suffocating tension. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seoul skyline was battered by a torrential downpour, the lightning perfectly mirroring the impending corporate slaughter inside. At the far end of the long mahogany table sat Chairman Seo. He looked 10 years older, his face pale and drawn, sipping cautiously from a cup of weak ginger tea. He was still traumatized by the laxative incident, completely unaware that his family's foundation was about to be obliterated. Seo Minjun sat at the head of the table. He wore a razor-sharp, charcoal gray three-piece suit, his alluring, perfectly styled dark hair catching the light. His young, handsome Korean face was a mask of terrifying, absolute calm. Beside him sat Mira, radiating the power of an untouchable deity. She wore a tailored, plunging crimson pantsuit that contrasted breathtakingly with her rich, glowing dark brown skin. She looked less like a corporate wife and more like an executioner waiting for the guillotine to drop. The heavy oak doors swung open. Madame Chaisukja swept into the room with the grandiose arrogance of an invading empress. She wore a pristine white Chanel suit, dripping in South Sea pearls, her chin held so high it was a miracle she didn't trip over the Persian rug. Flanking her was Junho. He had finally shed his dusty sub-level 4 trousers. He was back in a bespoke Italian suit, his hair slicked back, his chest puffed out with vindictive pride. With Han gone, he believed he had eliminated his only vulnerability. He was ready to take back his throne. "You're late, Sukja," Chairman Seo grunted, rubbing his temples. "What is the meaning of calling an emergency board meeting? I am not in the mood for theatrics." Madame Chai didn't sit down. She paced slowly behind the chairs of the seated directors, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Theatrics, my dear husband, is exactly what this company has devolved into since you handed the reins to your eldest son," Madame Chai declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority. She stopped and pointed a manicured finger directly at Minjun. "In less than 2 weeks, Minjun has turned CO Holdings into a laughingstock. He has driven away key investors, alienated the elite of the city, and humiliated his own family to appease his foreign distraction." Madame Chai cast a look of pure venom at Mira. "A woman with no pedigree, no background, and no understanding of our culture. I will not stand by and watch my life's work be dismantled by a defective heir and a street rat." Junho stepped forward, slamming his hands onto the mahogany table. He looked directly at his older brother, a smug, victorious sneer spreading across his face. "It's over, Minjun. We have invoked Article 14 of the corporate charter. A vote of absolute no confidence. We have the majority backing of the board. You are being officially removed as CEO, and your shares will be placed into a blind trust controlled by Mother and myself." The boardroom was dead silent. The rain lashed against the glass. Junho waited for the panic. He waited for Minjun to yell, or for Myra's flawless, arrogant mask to crack. He waited for the sweet taste of total victory. Instead, Minjun leaned back in his leather executive chair. He steepled his long fingers together, his dark, merciless eyes locking onto Junho. And then, the supposedly emotionless, terrifying king of Seoul's underworld did something that made the blood freeze in Junho's veins. Minjun laughed. It was a low, dark, vibrating rumble of pure, unadulterated amusement. It echoed in the cavernous room, sending a collective shiver down the spines of the board members. "A vote of no confidence," Minjun repeated softly, his lips curling into a devastating smirk. He turned his head slightly to look at his wife. "Did you hear that, darling? They have the majority." Mira picked up her crystal water glass, taking a slow, delicate sip. She didn't look at Junho. She looked right through him. "How very ambitious of them," she purred. "It's a shame their math is so catastrophically flawed." Madame Chai's eyes twitched. "Flawed? I have the signed proxies of 7 directors sitting right here in my briefcase. You are outvoted, Minjun. Step down." "Hold on." Madame Chai just walked in with 7 signed proxies, thinking she already won, and Minjun laughed. "If you already know these two have something absolutely catastrophic prepared for this boardroom, subscribe right now and turn your notifications all the way up. Drop 'the math is flawed' in the comments and keep watching, because what happens in the next 60 seconds is going to make your jaw hit the floor." Madame Chai, Mira said, setting her glass down. The playful tone vanished, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp steel that commanded the immediate attention of every soul in the room. "You assume these directors are loyal to you because you blackmailed them, bribed them, and invited them to your little tea parties. But loyalty bought with stolen money is remarkably fragile." Mira reached out and tapped a single button on the sleek console embedded in the table. Instantly, the massive, wall-to-wall 8K screens behind Minjun flared to life. "What is this?" Chairman Seo barked, squinting at the screens. Displayed in massive, undeniable letters were dozens of highly classified, meticulously documented banking ledgers. But they weren't the forged Cayman Island accounts Junho had found. These were real. Let's talk about that stolen money, shall we? Mira announced, standing up. She began to slowly walk the length of the table, her presence completely dwarfing Madame Chai's. For the last decade, Madame Chai has been quietly siphoning operational funds from CO Holdings' logistics division and funneling them directly into her brother's failing real estate ventures in Busan. Lies. Madame Chai shrieked, the color violently draining from her surgically tightened face. This is a fabrication. Turn those screens off. Oh, I wouldn't do that, Minjun countered smoothly. Because the next slide is even more fascinating. The screen shifted. A high-definition video began to play. It was security footage from a private underground parking garage, dated just 3 days ago. It clearly showed Madame Chai handing a thick manila envelope to the chief corporate regulator of Seoul, a massive, highly illegal bribe to ignore the discrepancies in Junho's department. Chairman Seo gripped the arms of his chair, his jaw dropping open. Sukja, you bribed a federal official? And she didn't stop there. Mira continued smoothly, stopping right in front of Junho. She looked up at him, her dark eyes flashing with the vengeance of a ghost who had finally come to collect. Junho thought he was so clever. He thought he could hide the $3 million he liquidated from a private trust fund in 2023. He even tried to frame his fiancée for it. Junho stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. How do you know about that? He choked out, his chest heaving in pure panic. Because we planted the Han files, you absolute fool, Minjun stated, his voice a lethal, crushing weight in the room. We knew you would tear her apart. We knew you would isolate yourself. And while you were busy kicking your only ally to the curb, my forensics team cracked your encrypted corporate drive. The screens shifted one final time. It displayed Junho's personal IP address, his private signature, and the exact routing numbers he used to liquidate Adriana's trust fund on the day he threw her into the river. Father, it's a setup. Junho screamed, turning to Chairman Seo with wild, pleading eyes. Minjun forged this. He's trying to frame us. Chairman Seo slowly stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked at the undeniable, mountainous pile of evidence on the screens. He looked at his wife, who was physically trembling, her aristocratic facade completely shattered. And he looked at his youngest son, a pathetic, greedy coward. You stole from the company, Chairman Seo rasped, his voice trembling with a terrifying, quiet rage. You both stole from me. You used my name to commit federal crimes. Father, please. Silence, the chairman roared, slamming his cane against the floor. You are no son of mine. And you, Sukja, are no longer my wife. I will see you both rot in a federal penitentiary. Madame Chai let out a wounded, guttural sob. She lunged toward the table, glaring at the board members she had counted on. Do something. We have the votes. Vote him out. Director Park, the man Madame Chai had considered her closest ally, slowly adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. He refused to look at her. Madame Chai. Chairman Minjun purchased all of our outstanding personal debts 3 days ago. We abstain from the vote. The trap snapped shut. They had nothing. No money. No allies. No company. No family. Junho fell to his knees on the carpet, his hands gripping his hair in absolute, sanity-breaking despair. He looked up at Mira, his eyes wide and fractured. In that split second, as the lightning flashed outside, he didn't see the flawless, terrifying Mrs. Seo. There was no doubt she was Adriana, his supposed deceased fiancée. You, Junho whispered, tears of absolute terror streaming down his face. Adriana. Mira stepped forward, looking down at the broken, weeping man at her feet. She didn't feel pity. She didn't feel sorrow. She felt the sweet, intoxicating rush of absolute liberation. I told you, Mira whispered, her voice so soft only he could hear it. Dead girls don't wear Chanel. But they do ruin lives. Dead girls don't wear Chanel. But they do ruin lives. Mira just said it to his face. He's on his knees. The evidence is on the screens. Director Park just abstained. The trap that has been building since Chapter 1 just snapped shut and I cannot breathe. If this moment just destroyed you, Smash that like button right now and drop "Dead girls don't wear Chanel" in the comments. We need to scream about this together. Share this with absolutely everyone. The best part is still coming. Do not click away. Minjun pressed a button on his phone. The heavy oak doors swung open, and half a dozen federal police officers, accompanied by Minjun's elite security team, marched into the boardroom. Madam Chaisukja. Seo Junho, the lead officer, announced, pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. You are under arrest for grand corporate embezzlement, federal bribery, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Get your hands off me. Madam Chai shrieked, thrashing wildly as an officer grabbed her arms. I am the matriarch. I own this city. Let me go. Junho didn't fight. He went completely limp, his eyes glazed over as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. He was dragged out of the room, staring blankly at the floor, a completely destroyed man. As the screaming faded down the hallway, the boardroom descended into a terrified, breathless silence. The remaining directors sat entirely frozen, terrified to even breathe too loudly. Minjun stood up, casually buttoning his suit jacket. He walked around the table, wrapping his arms securely around Myra's waist, pulling her flush against his side. He looked at the trembling board of directors with eyes that promised death to anyone who ever crossed them again. The vote of no confidence has been officially dismissed, Minjun declared smoothly, his baritone voice echoing with undisputed, terrifying authority. The meeting was adjourned. Together, the king and his queen walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ruins of their enemies behind them. Handcuffs. On Madam Chai. I am the matriarch. I own this city. Ma'am, the city just repossessed you. And Junho went limp. He didn't even fight. He just completely collapsed. 5 years of planning, one button on a console, and Mira dismantled an entire empire without raising her voice once. This woman is the greatest revenge story ever told, and I will die on that hill. If this chapter absolutely wrecked you, subscribe this second, drop "The meeting is adjourned" in the comments, like this video, and share it with every single person you know. Chapter 4 is coming, and I promise you, the story is far from over. The queen still has secrets. And so does Minjun. Chapter 4, Crazy Cane Lady. The memory of being thrown onto the gravel driveway of the Seo mansion with nothing but a cardboard box was a humiliation Kim Hoon swore she would erase from the earth. For the first few days, she had hidden in a cheap motel, surviving on convenience store ramen and pure, unadulterated spite. But Hoon was nothing if not a survivor. She still had her face, her figure, and a ruthlessly curated contacts list from her days as a high society darling. She leveraged every favor, called every desperate producer she knew, and finally managed to secure a meeting with Star Peak Entertainment, one of the most aggressive, fast-rising talent agencies in Seoul. They didn't care about her broken engagement. They cared about infamy. Hoon was trending. She was the crazy cane lady, and in the entertainment world, any publicity was good publicity. Star Peak signed her immediately, scrubbing her image, rebranding her as a misunderstood, tragic beauty who had escaped a toxic, controlling chaebol family. Within weeks, the campaign worked. Hoon was booked on talk shows, cast in a highly anticipated melodrama, and paid millions of dollars in advance. She clawed her way back into a luxury penthouse, her ego reinflating to a size even larger than before. She was no longer just the fiancée of a wealthy man. She was a star in her own right. Then came the crowning achievement. Starpeak's CEO, manager Baek Hee-ho, called her into his office with a contract that made her eyes water. A massive, anonymous international conglomerate was launching a luxury perfume line in Asia, Laura Supreme. They wanted Hoon as the exclusive face of the brand. The payout was astronomical. Hoon signed without reading the fine print. The advert was a masterpiece. Billboards of Hoon draped in white silk holding the crystal perfume bottle covered the sides of Seoul's skyscrapers. The fragrance itself was intoxicating, a blend of night-blooming jasmine and crushed diamonds, or so the marketing claimed. It sold out within 48 hours. Women everywhere were wearing it. Hoon had won. She was untouchable. 2 days later, Star Peak Entertainment threw a lavish, multi-million-dollar gala at the Banyan Tree Club and Spa to celebrate the unprecedented success of the launch. The guest list included the absolute elite of the entertainment and corporate worlds. And, much to Han's profound, vindictive delight, CEO Minjun and his wife had RSVP'd, yes. Let them come, Han thought, adjusting the bodice of her heavily sequined, gold Versace gown in the VIP mirror. Let that street rat see what a real queen looks like. I built my own empire. The grand ballroom was a sea of flashing cameras, overflowing champagne towers, and thumping bass. When Han descended the grand staircase, the room erupted. Teenage starlets and rookie actresses flocked to her like moths to a flame, their eyes wide with absolute worship. Miss Kim, you look stunning, a young idol gushed, holding out a gold pen. Can I please get an autograph? Han paused, her eyes slowly raking up and down the girl's outfit. It was an off-the-rack dress from a mid-tier department store. Han's perfectly glossed lips curled into a sneer of pure disgust. I don't sign cheap polyester, Han drawled loudly, ensuring the surrounding crowd heard her. It ruins the ink of my pen. Step aside. The young girl's face crumbled in humiliation as she was shoved out of the way by Han's massive security detail. Han glided through the room, only stopping to acknowledge directors, producers, and women wearing jewelry that passed her mental appraisal. She was the absolute center of the universe. Until the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom opened again. The atmospheric shift in the room was instantaneous. The thumping music seemed too dull, and the frantic clicking of the paparazzi's cameras abruptly stopped, followed immediately by a frenzied, desperate rapid fire of flashes. Han's smile faltered. She turned toward the entrance, her stomach dropping. Standing in the doorway was Seo Mira. She didn't wear sequins. She didn't wear loud, branded logos. Mira wore a floor-length, backless gown made of liquid black silk. To the untrained eye, it looked incredibly simple, almost devoid of design. But to the true billionaires in the room, it was instantly recognizable, a priceless, archival piece of vintage Givenchy haute couture. The rich, glowing dark brown skin of her shoulders and back caught the chandelier light flawlessly. Her hair was swept up into an elegant, effortless knot, secured by a single, massive diamond hairpin that cost more than Han's entire newly acquired penthouse. Mira didn't look like an entertainer begging for attention. She looked like the woman who owned the bank that funded the entertainment. My God, who is that? Whispered a famous film director standing near Han. She's breathtaking. Who's she? An actress asked, her eyes wide with envy. Look at her posture. It's like she owns the building. The crowd naturally parted for Mira as she descended the stairs, their attention completely and irrevocably violently ripped away from the guest of honor. Han's face contorted into a mask of absolute, unhinged fury. Her hands curled into fists, her manicured nails digging into her palms. How dare she? How dare she come to my party and steal my spotlight? Jia. Han snapped, turning to her trembling personal assistant. Why yes, Miss Kim, the PA squeaked. Look at what that arrogant bitch is wearing, Han hissed, pointing a shaking finger at Mira. It doesn't even have a brand name. It looks like a cheap nightgown. Go over there, tell security she's severely underdressed for a black tie event, and have her thrown out. Humiliate her in front of the press. Jia, who was entirely new to the industry and had no idea who the CEO family truly was, nodded frantically. Eager to please her terrifying boss, she marched across the ballroom, signaling two massive security guards to follow her. Mira was standing near the center of the room, calmly declining a glass of champagne from a waiter, when the PA and the two guards approached her. Excuse me, ma'am, Jia said loudly, her voice piercing the quiet of the crowd. Miss Kim Han has requested that you leave. This is an exclusive gala, and your attire does not meet the luxury standards of this event. You look a bit cheap. The crowd gasped. Several of Han's sycophant friends, eager to earn favor, began to snicker. She does look a bit plain, doesn't she? One of the actresses whispered loudly. Not a single logo. Probably rented it, another giggled. Mira didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head, her dark eyes locking onto the two massive security guards who were stepping forward to grab her arms. Mira didn't say a word. She simply glared at them. It was a look of such profound, suffocating, terrifying dominance that the two guards instantly froze in their tracks. The air around her seemed to drop 10 degrees. The guards, trained to handle rowdy paparazzi, suddenly felt the primal, instinctual terror of a prey animal staring into the eyes of an apex predator. Their blood ran cold. Neither of them dared to move a single muscle. Ignoring the trembling PA entirely, Mira smoothly turned away. She walked past the frozen guards, her silk dress trailing silently behind her. She walked directly toward the front of the ballroom, right up to the elevated VIP section. And, with agonizing, beautiful grace, Mira sat down directly in the center of the plush, velvet throne, the exact chair reserved for the guest of honor. For Haun, the ballroom went dead silent. Haun completely lost her senses. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect snapped the last remaining thread of her sanity. She grabbed a full glass of red wine off a passing waiter's tray and stomped across the marble floor, her gold sequins clashing violently. "Get out of my chair!" Haun shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She stood at the base of the VIP stage, pointing her wine glass at Mira. "Who do you think you are? This is my night. My gala. You are nothing but a gold-digging street rat who got lucky." Mira lazily crossed one long leg over the other, resting her chin on her hand. She looked down at Haun with an expression of pure, deeply amused pity. "Are you done screaming, Haun?" Mira asked, her voice a soft, melodic hum that carried perfectly through the silent room. "Or do you need me to call the Swiss Alps to book you another psychiatric evaluation? You really do sound incredibly crazy right now." The sycophants in the crowd gasped. "How rude," a producer yelled. "Miss Kim is a national treasure. Throw the crazy woman out." Fueled by the crowd's backing, Haun saw red. "I'll show you crazy," she screamed. With a violent flick of her wrist, Haun hurled the contents of her glass directly at Mira. The dark red wine splashed across the front of Myra's priceless, vintage Givenchy silk gown, dripping down the fabric like blood. The entire ballroom inhaled sharply. Mira looked down at the stain. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even stand up. She slowly reached out, plucked a linen napkin from a nearby table, and delicately dabbed a drop of wine off her collarbone. "Well," Mira whispered, her dark eyes flashing with a terrifying, absolute darkness. "That was a very expensive mistake." She threw red wine on a vintage Givenchy gown worth more than her entire penthouse. And Mira just dabbed her collarbone and said that was a very expensive mistake, quietly. No screaming. No crying. Just ice cold and absolutely terrifying. Haun has absolutely no idea what she just triggered. If your heart is pounding right now, subscribe immediately and turn your notifications all the way up because what happens next in this ballroom is going to make you scream at your screen. Drop "very expensive mistake" in the comments right now. Like, share, and do not look away. I'm going to make you pay for trespassing. Haun raged, pulling her phone from her clutch. "I am calling Manager Bay. He's the CEO of Star Peak. He will have you arrested and dragged out of here in handcuffs." She frantically dialed the number, putting it on speakerphone so the whole room could hear the destruction of CEO Mira. "You can call whoever you like," Mira replied smoothly, leaning back in the velvet throne, entirely unbothered by the wine stain. "But while you have him on the line, you might want to ask him how he plans to keep his agency afloat after I withdraw my endorsement." Haun froze, the phone ringing in her hand. Then she let out a loud, hysterical, booming laugh. It echoed through the room, sounding slightly manic. "Your endorsement?" Haun cackled, clutching her stomach as if it physically hurt. "Are you out of your mind? Laura Supreme is owned by a multi-billion-dollar French conglomerate. You think because you married into money, you suddenly own the global fragrance market. You are impersonating an executive. You really have lost your mind." The guests began to murmur, looking at Mira as if she were a delusional patient who had escaped a ward. "She's clearly unwell," a director whispered. "Sad, really." "Manager Bay," Haun yelled as the line finally connected, though she didn't wait for him to speak. She saw the man himself pushing his way through the crowd at the back of the room. "Manager Bay, get up here right now. This woman is trespassing, insulting me, and impersonating our investors." Manager Bay Kehoe, a short, balding man in a sweating tailored suit, burst through the front of the crowd. He was panting heavily, having just run from the executive lounge. "Arrest her," Hone demanded, pointing at Mira. "And before you do, I'm going to teach her a lesson about respect." Hone raised her hand high into the air, stepping onto the VIP stage. She swung her arm down, putting all her body weight into what was meant to be a devastating, ringing slap across Myra's face. But her hand stopped in midair. Manager Bay had lunged forward, grabbing Hone's wrist with a grip so tight she yelped in pain. "Manager Bay, what are you doing?" Hone cried, trying to yank her arm back. She looked at his face and recoiled. Manager Bay's face was completely devoid of color. He was sweating profusely, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like he was staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. His chest heaved. He was furious. Yes, Hone thought triumphantly. He is furious at Mira. "Tell security to drag her out, manager," Hone ordered, rubbing her wrist as he let go. "She ruined my night." Manager Bay slowly turned his head to look at Hone. Smack. The sound of the slap cracked through the silent ballroom like a bullwhip. Hone's head whipped to the side, her gold earrings flying off into the crowd. She staggered backward, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. Before she could even register the pain, Manager Bay raised his hand and struck her again. Smack. A brutal, dirty, backhanded slap across the exact same cheek. Hone collapsed onto the carpeted steps of the stage, clutching her rapidly swelling face. Tears of absolute shock and agony welled in her eyes. The entire ballroom of celebrities, directors, and executives screamed in synchronized horror. "Manager Bay?" Hone sobbed, looking up at him as a trickle of blood ran from the corner of her lip. "Have you gone crazy? Why did you hit me?" Manager Bay didn't answer her. He didn't even look at her anymore. His knees suddenly buckled. Right there, in front of the flashing cameras of the paparazzi and the elite of Seoul, the CEO of Star Peak Entertainment dropped to his knees on the marble floor. He bowed his head so low his forehead pressed against the polished stone directly at Myra's feet. "Madam CEO," Manager Bay cried, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated panic. "I beg of you. I had no idea. Please, I ask for your boundless mercy. Do not destroy us." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The guests were paralyzed, their brains failing to comprehend why a powerful CEO was groveling at the feet of a woman they had just called a cheap, delusional street rat. Mira slowly stood up from the velvet throne. The wine-stained black silk clung to her figure, making her look like a dark, vengeful angel. She looked down at the weeping manager, her face an unreadable mask of ice. "Get up, Mr. Bay," Mira commanded softly. "Your sweat is ruining the floor." The manager scrambled to a kneeling position, keeping his head bowed submissively. "I explicitly instructed your legal team that my identity as the primary shareholder and owner of the holding company that launched Laura Supreme was to remain strictly confidential," Mira said, her voice echoing in the dead quiet room. "I invested $70 million into this campaign. And yet, I arrive at a gala funded by my money, only to have your talent assault me with a glass of cheap Merlot and attempt to have me arrested." Hone stopped breathing. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She owns it? Hone's mind fractured. The perfume, the millions, she controls it all? "Madam CEO, I swear on my life, she acted alone." Manager Bay pleaded, clapping his hands together. "She is arrogant and foolish. Please do not withdraw the funding. If you pull the international distribution contract, Star Peak will go bankrupt by Monday. Thousands of jobs will be lost. I will fire her right now. I will blacklist her from the industry." "No," Hone shrieked, crawling forward on her hands and knees. The illusion of her grand comeback was shattering into millions of razor-sharp pieces. "No, please. Manager Bay, you can't." Mira tilted her head, watching Hone grovel. Firing her was too easy. Blacklisting her was too swift. "I do not want her fired, Mr. Bay," Mira said smoothly. Manager Bay blinked, looking up with a glimmer of desperate hope. Anything. Whatever you desire, Madam CEO. I will leave my investment exactly where it is, Mira announced, her dark eyes locking onto the terrified, weeping Hoon. On one condition. Miss Kim is so fond of wearing expensive clothes and being served by others. For the next 30 days, she will be officially reassigned. She will not be acting. She will not be modeling. Mira stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking sharply against the floor until she stood directly in front of Hoon. For the next month, Kim Hoon will report to the CEO mansion and the companies at 5 o'clock every morning, Mira declared. She will scrub the floors. She will wash the linens. She will serve me my meals. She will be my personal, indentured maid. If she misses a single day or talks back a single time, I will bankrupt Star Peak, and I will personally ensure Miss Kim spends the rest of her life in a debtor's prison. Manager Bay didn't even hesitate. Done. It is done, Madam CEO. She will be at your estate tomorrow morning in a uniform. No, please. Han sobbed, grabbing the hem of Myra's wine-stained dress. The ultimate humiliation, to become the servant of the woman she had tried to kill. To clean the toilets of the mansion she had once planned to rule, and also to become a cleaner in the companies she had once acted like the boss. It was a fate worse than death. Mira, please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything else. Don't make me a maid. Mira slowly leaned down. Her rich dark brown skin glowed under the lights as she brought her face inches from Hoon's ear. The scent of dark vanilla and smoke completely overpowered the cheap smell of the spilled wine. I told you, Mira whispered, her voice a chilling, lethal hiss that only Hoon could hear. I will make you suffer double for what you and Junho did to me 5 years ago. The river didn't swallow me, Hoon. But I promise you, by the time I am done with you, you will wish it had killed me. Hoon let out a strangled, terrified gasp, falling backward onto the floor, her entire body shaking violently. She looked at Mira not with hatred, but with the primal, absolute terror of a woman staring at a demon. Before Hoon could beg again, the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom slammed open once more. The temperature in the room plummeted. The shadows seemed to lengthen. Seo Minjun had arrived. He strode into the ballroom, a towering, devastatingly handsome god of wrath. He wore a tailored, midnight blue suit that perfectly complemented Myra's gown. His alluring, dark hair fell slightly over his cold, piercing eyes that swept the room and instantly zeroed in on the red wine stain on his wife's dress. The murderous intent that flared in Minjun's expression made several guests physically take a step back. He didn't look at Manager Bay or at the weeping Hoon. He walked directly to Mira. Who did this? Minjun asked, his deep baritone vibrating with a lethal, barely contained violence. He reached out, his large, warm hand gently touching the untainted silk near her shoulder. The guests held their breath. They were awed by his flawless Korean features, his broad shoulders, the sheer, undeniable power radiating from him. The women in the crowd watched with pure, burning envy. He was the most dangerous man in Seoul, and yet he was looking at this woman as if someone had just vandalized the Mona Lisa. Mira offered him a small, genuinely warm smile, the ice in her eyes melting instantly under his touch. Just a clumsy waitress, my love, Mira said softly, placing her hand over his. She tripped. But she's just agreed to work off the damages at the mansion for the next month. Isn't that right, Manager Bay? Manager Bay nodded so fast his neck cracked. Yes, absolutely. It's completely our fault, Chairman Seo. Minjun's dark eyes flicked down to Hoon, who was trembling on the floor like a beaten dog. He recognized her. He understood exactly what his wife had just orchestrated. A devastating, dark smirk curled the corner of his lips. Excellent, Minjun murmured. He wrapped his arm securely around Myra's waist, pulling her flush against his side. Then let us leave this place, my queen. It smells like cheap desperation and bad perfume. He turned, guiding her back up the aisle. The crowd instantly parted, bowing their heads in profound respect and absolute fear. They watched the ultimate power couple exit the ballroom, leaving Kim Hoon weeping on the floor in her ruined gold sequins, her empire reduced to ashes, and her future holding nothing but a mop and a bucket. The trap had closed, and the queen was just getting started. Hun spent weeks rebuilding her empire. She signed a multi-million-dollar perfume deal. She threw a lavish gala. And Mira owned the perfume the whole time. $70 million. Mira funded Hoon's entire comeback just to snatch it all back in one night and turn her into a maid who reports at 5 a.m. The CEO was on his knees on the marble floor, and Minjun walked in smelling blood and said, "It smells like cheap desperation and bad perfume. I am not okay." If this chapter just made your whole week, subscribe this second, smash that like button until it breaks, and drop 5 a.m. maid uniform in the comments, because Hoon's redemption arc just became a mop arc and we are all here for it. Share this with everyone you know. Chapter 5 is coming and the queen is far from finished. Chapter 5. You Are a Star. The towering glass and steel headquarters of Laura Supreme in Gangnam usually smelled of million-dollar jasmine and success. But today, for Kim Hoon, it smelled strictly of industrial bleach and absolute despair. At 5 a.m. sharp, Hoon had been forced to trade her Versace sequins for a scratchy, highly unflattering, neon yellow janitorial jumpsuit. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun under a hairnet, and she was handed a heavy metal mop bucket. Her first assignment wasn't in a hidden back room. It was the grand, open-concept main lobby, the exact place she had strutted through just weeks prior, acting like the queen of the world during her endorsement shoots. "Miss Kim," a sharp voice called out. Hoon flinched, leaning on her mop. Walking toward her was the head of public relations, a woman named Sujin. Just last month, Hoon had screamed at Sujin for bringing her a latte that was 2 degrees too cold and had intentionally poured it all over the woman's shoes. Sujin was currently holding a clipboard, a wickedly delighted smile on her face. Behind her stood half a dozen junior staff members, makeup artists, lighting assistants, and interns, all holding their smartphones up, recording every miserable second. "You missed a spot near the elevator banks," Sujin said sweetly, pointing with her pen. "And please, put your back into it." Madam CEO expects the marble to be reflective enough to serve as a mirror. Hoon's face burned with profound humiliation. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, a tear of pure frustration leaking from her eye. "I am a star." "You were a star," an intern corrected loudly, earning a chorus of giggles from the staff. "Now you're just the smudge remover." Chop chop, Cinderella. Gritting her teeth so hard her jaw ached, Hoon dragged the heavy, sloshing bucket toward the elevators. She dropped to her hands and knees, scrubbing at the pristine white marble until her manicured nails chipped and her shoulders screamed in agony. Just as she finally finished a massive section, standing up to wipe the sweat from her forehead, the VIP elevator chimed open. Out stepped one of the company's top investors, an eccentric French heiress who always traveled with her prized, overfed teacup poodle. The poodle trotted out of the elevator, sniffed the freshly bleached floor, squatted, and unapologetically dropped a massive, steaming pile of dog poop right in the center of Hoon's freshly mopped marble. The staff completely lost their minds, howling with laughter. Several people actually doubled over, clutching their stomachs as they filmed Hoon's horrified, trembling expression. "Oh no!" Sujin gasped with entirely fake sympathy. "A code brown in Sector A. Miss Kim, you'd better get the scraper. That looks incredibly sticky. I am not cleaning that up." Hoon shrieked, her voice cracking in hysteria as she pointed at the offending pile. "I draw the line at dog feces. You'll clean it up with your bare hands if you want to keep Star Peak out of bankruptcy," the security guard yelled, crossing his massive arms. Defeated, broken, and weeping openly, Hoon sank to her knees. As the entire lobby laughed at her, taking photos that would undoubtedly end up on the front pages of the tabloids, Hoon reached for the paper towels. It was the ugliest, most deeply humiliating moment of her entire life. 50 floors above the chaos, in the sprawling, soundproofed CEO suite, CEO Mira was sitting in a plush leather chair, watching the live CCTV feed of the lobby on her massive monitors. Mira was laughing so hard she had to cover her mouth with her hand. The sight of Han, the woman who had plotted to murder her, weeping over a puddle of poodle poop was the sweetest, most intoxicating comedy she had ever witnessed. She actually hesitated, Mira giggled, pointing at the screen. I genuinely thought she was going to run away, but she actually grabbed the paper towels. Suddenly, the monitors went completely black. Mira blinked, sitting up straight. Hey, I was watching that. Standing beside the desk, holding the remote control, was Seo Minjun. He looked devastatingly handsome in a bespoke, dark charcoal suit, the jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened just enough to give him a dangerous, predatory edge. But right now, the ruthless mafia heir was pouting. Minjun tossed the remote onto the couch and stepped around the massive oak desk. "You've been paying attention to that rat for the last 45 minutes, he said, his deep baritone vibrating with a low, possessive rumble. "I am standing right here, Mrs. Seo. And my patience has officially expired." Before Mira could even process the warning, Minjun moved. With effortless, terrifying strength, his hands gripped her waist. He lifted her completely out of the leather chair as if she weighed nothing at all, taking a single step forward and firmly placing her down onto the edge of the polished oak desk. Mira gasped, taken entirely off guard. Her hands instinctively flew to his broad shoulders to steady herself. Her tailored, emerald green pencil skirt rode up high on her thighs, exposing her smooth, glowing dark brown skin. "Minjun," Mira breathed, her eyes widening. "What are you doing? This is an office. The blinds are only half closed. Someone might see us." Minjun didn't step back. He stepped directly between her parted knees, caging her against the edge of the desk. He rested his large hands on her exposed thighs, his thumbs slowly, agonizingly tracing circles on her bare skin. The touch sent an immediate, violent shiver straight down Myra's spine. "I bought the building," Minjun murmured, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a heat that could melt glass. "If anyone looks, I will simply fire them. Now, you need to make up for ignoring your husband." Myra's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to maintain her fierce, untouchable matriarch facade, but the way he was looking at her, with that intense, consuming devotion, was entirely devastating. "Make up for it," she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "How?" Minjun's lips curved into a dark, incredibly mischievous smile. He didn't answer with words. He leaned down, his face hovering just inches from her exposed legs. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed a warm, lingering kiss to the sensitive skin just above her knee. Mira let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, her fingers gripping the lapels of his suit jacket. "Minjun, stop, someone will walk in." Minjun paused. He looked up at her through his thick, dark lashes. He widened his eyes just a fraction, softening his sharp, aristocratic features into an expression of profound, innocent heartbreak. It was the ultimate, weaponized wronged kitten look, entirely contradictory to the terrifying monster the world believed him to be. "You don't want me?" he whispered softly, his voice dropping into a husky, wounded cadence. "You'd rather watch the janitor than kiss me." It was completely unfair. Mira stared at the pout on the face of Seoul's most ruthless corporate warlord, and she was instantly, helplessly smitten. Her resistance crumbled into dust. A slow, wicked smile spread across Myra's lips. She let go of his lapels, her hands sliding down his chest. She grabbed his large, warm hand, pulling it upward and placing it firmly back on her exposed thigh. "Continue," Mira said softly, her dark eyes flashing with reciprocal fire. Minjun's kitten act vanished instantly, replaced by the hungry, victorious apex predator. He smiled, a dark promise in his eyes. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a deep, bruising kiss that completely stole the oxygen from the room. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest as his mouth traced a burning path along her jawline and down her neck. Mira arched her back, a soft, breathy moan escaping her lips as the intense heat between them ignited into an inferno. The revenge playing on the monitors was entirely forgotten, replaced by the overwhelming, intoxicating sensation of the man worshipping every inch of her right there on the executive desk. Far away from the glittering high-rises of Gangnam, in a dingy, dimly lit legal office on the outskirts of the city, the air was toxic with desperation. Madam Chaisukja paced the length of the cheap linoleum floor. Her Chanel suit was wrinkled, her diamonds were sitting in a police evidence locker, and her surgically tightened face looked haggard and aged. Beside her, slumped in a plastic waiting room chair, was Seo Junho. They had made bail barely. Madam Chai had been forced to liquidate her hidden emergency offshore accounts just to keep them out of a federal holding cell while they awaited trial for embezzlement and bribery. Pacing isn't going to fix this, Mother, Junho muttered, staring blankly at the wall. Minjun took everything. The shares are gone. The house is gone. The board turned their backs on us. It's over. Madam Chai stopped abruptly, turning on her heel to glare at her son. Do not ever say those words to me again, she hissed, her voice vibrating with venomous, aristocratic fury. It is never over. I did not spend 30 years building the Seo empire just to let a street rat like Adriana steal it out from under me. Junho snapped, his voice cracking with lingering panic. That woman is a monster. You saw what she did. She had the exact routing numbers, Mother. She played us perfectly. Madam Chai walked over and grabbed Junho by the collar of his wrinkled shirt, pulling him up to meet her crazed, determined eyes. She is an imposter playing a very dangerous game, Madam Chai sneered. They think they are untouchable because they have the money and the board. But every fortress has a weak point, Junho. Minjun's weak point is her. Junho frowned, pulling away from his mother's grip. What are you talking about? He's obsessed with her. He'd kill anyone who touches her. Exactly, Madam Chai smiled, a chilling, terrifying expression that made the hairs on Junho's arms stand up. He's blinded by his own devotion. But Mira, or Adriana, or whatever she calls herself, is not a ghost. She is flesh and blood. And she survived years ago after being wrapped in a sack and thrown into the river. Madam Chai walked over to the cheap desk and picked up a burner phone she had acquired that morning. Leave everything to me, I will handle it all, Madam Chai said with a cunning smile. She dialed a number and a terrifying voice sounded from the other end of the land. At your service, ma'am. Prepare my weapon. Madam Chai said to the voice, and Junho could only listen with a curious facial expression. Prepare my weapon. From a burner phone. In a cheap legal office. Madam Chai lost her diamonds, her mansion, her empire, and she is still not done. The woman is in bail clothes plotting assassination, and I am terrified. Drop "Prepare my weapon" in the comments if Chapter 6 just became the most important video of your life. Subscribe and share. Mira has no idea what's coming. Chapter 6. Too late to make amends. Back at the Seo mansion, the atmosphere in the master suite was completely oblivious to the impending storm. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over Mira as she sat on the velvet settee, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking to Chloe, her oldest friend from Atlanta, the only person outside of Minjun who knew she was still alive. I saw the articles online, Adriana, Chloe's voice crackled through the speaker, laced with deep concern. The paparazzi photos of you too. He looks at you like you hang the stars in the sky. Are you really falling in love with this feared mafia lord? After everything. Mira sighed, looking down at the massive diamond ring on her finger. A strange, heavy ache settled in her chest, but she forcefully pushed it down, relying on the cold, protective armor she had worn for 5 years. Don't be ridiculous, Chloe, Mira said, her voice dropping to a low, pragmatic murmur. Love is a liability. I learned that the hard way. Minjun is powerful, yes, and I am just borrowing his power to get my revenge on Junho and Haun. That's all this is. A transaction. Once my revenge is fully complete and they are completely destroyed, I plan to divorce him and leave. Adriana, are you sure? The way he looks at you. I'm sure, Mira cut her off smoothly. I can't afford to love anyone. Not anymore. What Mira didn't know was that the heavy mahogany door to the suite was open just a fraction of an inch. Standing in the shadows of the hallway was Seo Minjun. He had come up to bring her a gift, a rare emerald necklace he had spent weeks tracking down. But as her words drifted through the crack in the door, Min-jun froze. Just borrowing his power. A transaction. She plans to divorce me. The words didn't just cut him, they gutted him. The terrifying, ruthless man who ruled Seoul's underworld simply stood there, his dark eyes losing all their light. He had spent 5 years worshipping the ground she walked on, pulling her back from the abyss, hoping that one day, his absolute devotion would be enough to heal her. But he was just a tool. A means to an end. Without making a sound, Min-jun slowly backed away, the velvet jewelry box heavy and useless in his hand. He turned and walked down the long, empty corridor, taking his shattered heart with him. If your heart just broke with Min-jun in that moment, don't stay silent. Drop a broken heart in the comments right now if you think Mira has no idea what she just lost. And tell me, should Min-jun forgive her, or is this truly the end? As the days passed, the temperature in the Seo mansion dropped to an agonizing chill. Mira immediately noticed the shift. Min-jun, who used to touch her waist every time he passed her, who used to look at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch, was suddenly a ghost. He left for the office before she woke up and returned long after she had gone to sleep. When they did cross paths, his eyes were carefully blank, his voice painfully polite and distant. The coldness terrified her. It gnawed at her soul, revealing a truth she had been too stubborn to admit to Chloe. She missed his warmth. She missed him. Determined to fix whatever invisible wall had sprung up between them, Mira woke up at dawn. She put on her silk robe, her rich, glowing dark brown skin shivering slightly in the morning air, and walked into Min-jun's adjoining dressing room to finally ask him what was wrong. But the room was empty. His closet was half cleared. Myra's heart skipped a frantic beat. She rushed back into the bedroom. Sitting perfectly centered on his pristine, untouched pillow was a thick manila envelope and a handwritten letter. With trembling fingers, Mira opened the envelope. A stack of official, legally binding documents slid out. They were divorce papers. Already signed in Min-jun's bold, sharp handwriting. Tears instantly pricked her eyes as she unfolded the letter. My queen. I heard your conversation. You don't have to pretend anymore. I have loved you since the very first moment I saw you years ago, standing next to my foolish stepbrother. Even then, I knew you belonged at the top of the world. But I also know now that you will never love me back the same way. You were occupied with your revenge, and years ago, you were occupied loving those who didn't even care about you. There is no room in your heart for me. I cannot stay and watch you leave me. So, I am leaving first. I am leaving the country to find something else to keep me busy. Perhaps love just isn't for a monster like me. I have transferred the entirety of the family assets, the mansion, and the perfume company into your name. You can keep it all. I don't need it. I only ever needed you. Roll well, Adriana. Min-jun. A strangled, agonizing sob tore from Myra's throat. The paper slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor as her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands as the dam finally, catastrophically broke. She cried for the first time since she had come back from the dead. The walls she had built around her heart shattered, allowing the flood of her traumatic past to violently rush in. 5 years ago. She remembered it with sickening clarity. She was madly, blindly in love with Junho. Hoon was her best friend, the sister she trusted with all her secrets. It was supposed to be the day of her engagement. Adriana had walked into the VIP lounge to surprise Junho, only to find him pushing Hoon against the restroom sink, their clothes half undone, kissing her with a passion he had never shown Adriana. When the engagement ring slipped from Adriana's hand and clattered against the tiles, Junho hadn't apologized. He had panicked. His reputation was everything. He chased her through the back corridors of the venue, desperate to silence her before she told anyone. He caught her by the stairwell, shoving her so hard her head cracked against the concrete step, knocking her unconscious. When Adriana woke up, she was bound and gagged on the top floor of the uncompleted CO Holdings building. We can't just let her go, Junho, Hoon's voice had echoed in the dark. She'll ruin the merger. She'll ruin us. So what do we do? Junho had panicked. The river, Haun suggested coldly. She's terrified of the water. She can't swim. It will look like a tragic suicide. Adriana remembered the needle piercing her neck, the heavy, suffocating darkness of the canvas sack they shoved her into. She remembered the terrifying sensation of free falling, and then the freezing, crushing impact of the Han River. She had inhaled water, her lungs burning, sinking into the pitch-black abyss as the two people she loved most watched her drown. And then, a hand had pierced the darkness. Strong arms had ripped the sack open, pulling her lifeless body from the freezing depths. Min-jun had found her. For 5 years, he had been her savior. Adriana remembered waking up in a sterile, underground medical suite, so traumatized by the betrayal that she couldn't speak a single word for a month. Min-jun had sat by her bedside every single night. He brought the best experts in the world. He fed her, held her when the night terrors struck, and patiently, gently, helped her forge her shattered soul into the weapon she was today. And what had she done? Fresh, agonizing tears streamed down Adriana's face as she remembered Haun. Years ago, Haun was a starving nobody. Adriana had saved her from being severely burned by an angry vendor when Haun stole food out of hunger. Adriana, a wealthy heiress, had taken pity on her. She gave Haun shelter, designer clothes, and fed her. She even introduced her to her beloved grandmother. When the news of Adriana's suicide in the river broke, her grandmother's heart had given out from the grief. She died believing Adriana had abandoned her. Haun had bitten the hand that fed her, and Junho had destroyed her family. She had endured so much humiliation for Junho's sake, loving a man who viewed her as trash. But Min-jun? Min-jun had been her guardian angel for 5 years, asking for absolutely nothing in return. He had handed her billions of dollars, crushed her enemies, and offered her his soul. And she had called him a transaction. "I'm so stupid," Adriana choked out, frantically wiping her eyes. "I'm so incredibly stupid." She scrambled off the bed, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock her phone. She dialed Min-jun's private number. "The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable." No, pick up, please," she begged, dialing again. "Unavailable." She typed a frantic, desperate text message. "Min-jun, please don't go. I was lying. I was just scared. I love you. I love you so much. Please come back to me." She hit send, but the message remained undelivered. Panic completely consumed her. Adriana didn't change her clothes. She didn't call her driver. Still wearing her silk robe, she grabbed her car keys, sprinted barefoot out of the master suite, and raced down the grand staircase. She threw herself into the driver's seat of her sports car, the engine roaring to life. She had to get to the airport. She had to stop him before he disappeared from her life forever. She peeled out of the mansion gates, the tires squealing against the asphalt as she sped toward Incheon International Airport. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a hummingbird trapped in her ribs. "Just hold on. I'm coming." Suddenly, her cell phone buzzed loudly in the cup holder. Adriana snatched it up, praying to see Min-jun's name. Instead, the caller ID read, Secretary Choi. "Choi." Adriana answered breathlessly, swerving to avoid a truck. "Choi, where is he? Has his flight taken off yet? Tell him to stop the plane." There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that precedes a firing squad. "Madam." Secretary Choi's voice broke. He was weeping. The stoic, unbreakable right-hand man of the mafia boss was actively sobbing. Adriana's foot eased off the gas pedal. The blood in her veins turned to ice. "Choi, what is it? What's wrong?" "Madam, it's the chairman," Choi choked out, the sound of sirens blaring faintly in the background of his audio. "His private jet. They lost contact with the tower 10 minutes after takeoff." "What are you saying?" Adriana whispered, the phone slipping slightly in her sweaty grip. "It went down over the ocean, madam," Choi wept. "The plane crashed. There were no survivors." The phone dropped from Adriana's hand, tumbling onto the floorboard. The world outside the windshield blurred into a meaningless smear of colors. The sound of the engine faded into absolute, ringing silence. The air vanished from her lungs. She slammed her foot on the brakes, the car skidding wildly to a halt on the shoulder of the highway. Adriana gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning bone white, her mouth opening in a silent, agonizing scream. He was gone. The man who had pulled her from the depths of the river had just fallen from the sky, and she hadn't even gotten the chance to tell him she loved him. Her world didn't just crash down, it completely and violently ended. Will Adriana be able to uncover the truth behind the sudden plane crash? Is Madame Chai about to unleash her ultimate weapon, and how will Adriana survive this crushing heartbreak to protect the empire Min-jun left behind? The stakes have never been higher, and the revenge is far from over. Thank you so much for watching and following this incredible journey on Afro-Korean Diaries. Your support means the world, but the views and subscribers are not enough yet to unleash the full, explosive continuation of this story. If you want to see what happens next in part 2, please hit that subscribe button right now. Share this story with your friends, leave a comment, and help make Afro-Korean Diaries the most well-known, unforgettable channel out there. We can't do it without you. Subscribe now and brace yourselves for the next part. If that ending just left you speechless, you're not alone. Was it really a crash, or something far more sinister? Hit subscribe right now so you don't miss what happens next, because the truth behind Min-jun's death will change everything. Drop your theories in the comments. Do you think he's really gone, or is this just the beginning of something darker? Share this with someone who loves intense, emotional stories, because the next chapter, it's going to be unforgettable.